Good morning and good day to everyone. For those of you folks who are not in Europe or not Europe-centric, we had the exciting Eurovision whatnot last night, so I'm running a little bit behind myself today. But today we are going to be talking about needs and expectations, and we'll see how much we can cover in that. And in our visit to Business Central, we're going to be talking about efficiencies, some of the things that we can do to work with the system a little bit smarter and faster using templates and defaults and standards and things like that, as well as looking at similar sort of concepts over in Visual Studio Code. So today is about working smarter, not harder, and we'll see how that goes. You know, everything I have looked at in OBS has gotten rid of the swooshy effect slider, and yet it sticks around. I am haunted by my own early decision making, which is a really fantastic segue for today. So, one of the things that I have seen a lot of partners struggle with, and this affects every aspect of working with customers and just life in general, is making sure that you understand what people need from you and what they're expecting you to deliver. The obvious industry way I can speak to that this comes to the forefront is in development requests where a customization needs to be done. And very quickly we go from the customer has a request, the consultative or project management team says, okay, great, and hands that off to a developer, and a developer goes, what am I making? And they get back to the, very possibly they bring some solution to the customer or a long list of questions, and the customer is baffled as to what, I thought I explained all of this. One of the easy things that we do a lot of in the industry, or at least I've experienced a lot of partners do, is you get so busy that one of the first things that seems to disappear is keeping track of what's wanted. And if people don't write that down, that's a big problem. So, and additionally, a lot of folks don't put the time and effort into asking better questions, thinking through what is going to be expected. And one of the areas that I appreciate lots about Luke Van Voigt pushing test-driven development is that pushes some of the requirements exploring much earlier in the process, and that's a good thing because it gets people asking, what if, what's your expectation, when you do this, what do you think is going to happen? I feel like and there are a bajillion great quotes about expectations not met, but in the heart of things, if someone expects something of you and you don't meet that expectation, it's a disappointment. If that expectation is around functionality, well, then they were expecting it to work a certain way, and they're going to be disappointed if it doesn't. If you over-engineer and you build too much, they were expecting a lower budget or price point on that. They might have been expecting it faster. Expectation setting is pretty core to human existence and just working with other people. My household, we're fairly spectrum people, and different types of autistic mindsets are in play. And one of the things that we do to help manage expectations, keep household harmony, is we have whiteboards up in a central place for all of us on things that we're going to be doing soon, things that we're going to be doing today. That includes, we use little whiteboard magnets on those whiteboards that have a bunch of, these are the common tasks that always need to be redone. Because, like Sisyphus, we're always pushing, do the dishes up the hill, and various other things like that. So it's very easy in a household where you're sharing work effort with people to go, I intend to vacuum tomorrow in your head, and maybe someone is looking at the floor going, geez, why isn't this guy vacuuming? Well, by having the expectation set, by throwing that little dot up on the wall that says, tomorrow, or, in the soon bucket or whatever have you, vacuuming is up there. Oh, okay, they intend to do this. I don't need to ask them about that. I can see it moves over into the today, and then they do it. And by repeating that over and over, you, as a household, develop the skill set to communicate effectively what the expectations are. And you don't have to have conversations about, I need you to do this thing. We have a teenager who helps out with chores, not because we had some big elaborate chat about, you need to cooperate as part of the household, blah, blah, blah. We don't have fights about it or anything like that. It's just a couple of the to-dos around the house that we need him to participate in doing. They get moved to his today bucket. That's all. And he goes, oh, okay. And then he does them. And that's that. Very straightforward. It's just expectation, and meeting those expectations over and over again builds the trust. And that same principle applies with customers, because it's just people stuff. Everyone lives this way. So the more explicitly you can explore what people are expecting, record it, and meet it, the better off you are going to be. And since projects for our industry and Business Central are never just you need to be able to communicate those expectations effectively. But bringing that back around to requirements, I have absolutely experienced, just in the past 30 days, I've done a loose little requirements doc of, you want this, it should work this way. When these things happen, we will do X, Y, and Z. As an email. Sent it to a customer. They said, yes, that is correct. 2 weeks later, when those deliverables went to the customer, they asked basically, oh, why Z? What is that all about? That's backwards from what I was expecting. And it was impressive to me, because if they had only just scrolled down in their reply window, they would see that they had agreed to exactly that. So it happens, and people forget. People are busy. Most of the times when we're working with customers in the Business Central space, the person on the other side of the desk has a million other responsibilities outside of Business Central. It's important to their world. It's vital that it works for them. But like electricity, as long as it's on, they don't want to think about it. They don't need to consider, is the wiring in the walls doing what it's supposed to be doing? It's not their thing. So, at the very minimum, just capturing what the client expects in an email of, do I have this right, is step one. And I'm astonished at the number of people who don't do that. Some nice step twos can be, okay, we made instead of just an email, it's a Word doc, and we've saved it into a OneDrive somewhere where the client can even access it. What a concept. So how do you think about the things to ask in expectation setting? Well, there's an entire profession around exploring what someone wants and what someone needs. It's called requirements engineering. I am astonished at the number of people in the BC space that I've talked to here and there about requirements that, we don't have people that their sole responsibility is requirements engineering. that role typically falls onto consultative people or project management people or even salespeople to do this pretty elaborate and technical process of extracting from people, what are you thinking? What do you want to have happen? But there are great books, articles, and blogs about requirements engineering, so you can very quickly and easily deep dive into whatever level of learning about this that you're comfortable with. It is worth every bit of time that you will spend on it. You will save yourself hours and hours of frustration and unmet expectations just by reading 1 or 2 blogs about requirements engineering, because it structures your thinking to go, what do you expect? One of the great authors that is out there that does requirements engineering books, Carl, I would say Wiegers, maybe? I'm going to have to encourage more people to use the LinkedIn mobile functionality. You can, on Android and iOS, with the LinkedIn app, you can record how to pronounce your name so that people like me don't stumble across it poorly. Happens a lot in our industry, but something to think about if you haven't done that already. So when it comes to requirements, Carl has 3 levels that he likes to think of the different requirements, which are the business requirements. These are generally the high level objectives. We want to be able to ship more units on a monthly basis, and because one of the areas where we're stuck is that the picking process is not structured in a good way for our picking team to go through the warehouse and get things in the right order. They're having to shuffle through papers and lose time, go back and blah blah blah, or any number of other things. Just what's the problem, and what problem are we trying to solve? Define it and have that overview. And basically just, how will doing this project make my world better? For starters, if you aren't doing that high level sort of thing, how will this thing that we are about to undertake make my world better? It's a lot harder to talk about the value that someone's getting. Something like that, a warehouse picking process being improved, means that you can potentially ship more units every day, and for a business that logistics is key for them, that potentially is a huge cost savings and a great massive ability to expand their operations. There's a lot easier ROI to talk to when someone's deciding, is this project worth it? So that helps. And then you can go down to the next level down, which is the user requirements. And this is where you go, okay, in order to achieve that process, achieve that objective that has just been outlined, what is the system going to let this person or this group of people do that they can't do today? What are the steps that they're going through, and develop those into use cases. Now, I know some folks listening along to this have heard plenty of these terms thrown around. That's kind of what we're going for. So, like, okay, build some sort of story. This is where user stories come from. Describe the process. Okay, when our logistics manager gets in the morning and he's creating pick documents, what should that process look like? What information do they need in? What actions should they be able to take? What should result from their actions? It's not a big thing, but we don't slow down and do it. We don't always see the value in it, and that's a little terrifying. And you also have to start practice your edge case what if thinking. If my warehousing guy comes in the morning and he preps all the picks for the morning, well, what about what if? What if our biggest customer has a truck coming at lunchtime and they call up at 9 a.m. and they want to add a few things onto it? The warehousing team already did their prep work at 6 a.m. Is there a business process that reflects how that emergency shipment would be handled. And based on that business process, do we have to do anything in the system to support that business process? Explore those what-if questions. And then eventually, out of all those different use cases, you start getting your functional requirements. And I'm at the moment prepping and teaching some people to do this exact exploration. You have to have your high-level goal. You have to develop your story about what do people need to be able to do, and then turn that into the sequence of things that happen. And that is a fantastic sequence of events. Adds huge value, removes huge uncertainty, removes all sorts of risks from your project. It's not zero, but you at least then have the ability to say, okay, at each of these steps along the way, is this what you mean? I cannot describe how many projects went off the rails because at those different stages, there wasn't anything to ask the people involved, is this what you mean? So spend the time to write all that down. It will save you. If you don't do that in the beginning, you will still spend that time, but you will spend that time in going, this isn't what I wanted, and now you have to fix it. And you haven't created a positive trust reaction out of somebody. You've created a doubt. You've created an unmet expectation. It's a very negative experience. Now you're having to react to what they've wanted in a retroactive way, which, go figure, is really hard to schedule. Make sure that you have the right resources available for those things. So just explore what expectations are, write them down, communicate them back to the customer for verification, and internally share those requirements. I don't think it's a complicated concept. I'm hoping that most people who are watching or listening to this are going, yeah, you mean there are people who don't do that? And the answer is sure, there are plenty of people who don't do that. I've run into any number of customers who needed projects to be recovered because the team involved didn't do that. One of the things that I'm keenly aware of is there are more and more partners every day working with Business Central that have not worked with an ERP system before, as terrifying as that might be for plenty of us. But if you're just rolling out Office 365, which has requirements and expectations too, but if you're having a smaller product stack or one that doesn't involve as much fine-tuning and careful tailoring to be done upfront to be usable, it can be very easy to say, okay, well, you just sign up here with your credit card and now you've got an ERP system. Ta-da! And they're not practiced at that expectation exploration, particularly around Business Central. One of the things that I've done in the past, for example, in exploring customizations, and if you're a developer listening to this, this is one of the structures that is really, really helpful for devs to start thinking about asking these what-if questions. You can use the CRUD, create, read, update, delete questions. These are great what-if questions. Where should users be able to create the data? Is it created automatically? Is there any imports we need? Are there any security or GDPR considerations to the data? For reading, who should be able to access this? Who should be able to share that data out to external organizations? When does reading this data, when is this info going to provide benefit to the organization? And does the data come out anywhere in exports or reports? Does it need to be copied anywhere? For updates, who's responsible for updating the data? If the system should update it, like, calculations and things like that, when? Every time the user opens a screen? Should there be any audit trail? When someone updates a record, do you need to know that happened? What other places should be affected when someone makes a change? For deletion, should it be possible to delete data? Should there be any audit trail to it? Should it be automatic? So there are so many great what-if questions you can explore to just even those handful of questions can change the nature of a project, or at least scope things out a little bit. And that's one of the big advantages to this for everybody too, is it becomes much easier to say, that sounds like a great idea, but it's out of scope. Out of scope is your friend. It doesn't mean no, it just means it is not what we agreed to. One of the other things that you can do to level up on requirements, to move on beyond just exploring these basics, is when you've got agreement that these are all the different use cases and everything, is also you can prioritize them. Just, high, medium, low would be a fine start. So that way, maybe we can get all of the high level functional requirements done first. So that way, if there's any schedule shortfall, any complexity, any change requests that are potentially going to affect the schedule, we know that we've met all the high priority objectives of this project first. And then when it comes to change requests, it's a lot of times people are scared by change requests. I don't know why. It's just a way of writing down, okay, here were our 10 requirements. You sorted them, agreed to them. This was the schedule. This was the budget. These are the priorities of all those different things. You've asked for a new thing. Do you want that to affect the budget or the schedule or the priorities of the existing 10 items? The answer can be yes, that's okay. But the answer can also be no, but that's to the client to decide, really. Most of the time. It's not always, but most of the time it's, you're asking me. It's up to you. Do you want to change your priorities? But at least then you're having constructive dialogues. Another thing that comes up in those spaces all the time is projects aren't you begin, you end, and that's that. There's no more, you're done. It's very rare that those are the case. So often what I will encourage people to do during the business process or the use case modeling, or even in the change request process, is always have a follow-up phase. Like, there are undiscovered elements. You are building a new solution, you're building new processes. There are always going to be things that you didn't think of. No matter how fantastically your team is at requirement engineering, you're always going to have more stuff. You're always going to have more features. Your devs might have a great idea that sounds fantastic. Your consultative people might have a brilliant notion of what you could do with some Power Platform or Power BI stuff. Cool. Those are great ideas. Guess what? Now you have a process by saying that's a really cool idea. It's not in scope. But if you always structure bigger projects with the mindset that you are going to have a post-project follow-up phase where you say, okay, we've now gotten to the end of the project. There was a whole bunch of cool ideas that surfaced during this process. Now let's go through those and turn that into the follow-up project. That is fantastic. You give a proper structure and space for any brilliant new ideas that don't fit well enough to change the existing plan and project. But it's not a no, it's a that's a great idea, let's do that next week. That's all. I wish I could say that this stuff is obvious, but there are plenty of folks who I've worked with who just get too busy and these things don't happen. It's just the way of it. Even if people know to do some of these things, sometimes you're just too swamped to do things the right way. You just need it done. This comes up a lot for people who are working with converting or bringing over people to Business Central from other systems or from no systems, which are the scary ones. In the old system, we could. Okay? As a longtime dev, in the old system we could is one of the phrases that just drives me nuts. If the old system was good enough, you wouldn't be moving to a new system. So, I have a small little amusement on that one. Way back in, I want to say, Navision 4.0, maybe even 5, I was helping a customer move from an old system that all it did was the financials. It just did invoices and payments, and inventory was managed in Excel, and it was a mess. And it was well enough to develop the business. It got things done. It just didn't scale. But we had a particular salesperson in that organization who kept saying over and over again, I need the starting screen, of which, if you recall, there were a number of versions of Navision where there was no starting screen. You opened it up and it was just a menu off to the side, and that was it. It was just gray. I need my starting screen to work just like the old system. Would not let that sentence go. I need my start screen to look like the old system. The IT manager or / project manager for the client had enough sass in his organization internally that this wouldn't be taken too badly. We created a form in the old Navision environment that all it had was a picture of the start screen of the old system, and we set it for that particular user to open automatically. That's all it did, was just open a picture of the starting screen of the old system for this guy. You know what was funny about that? He left it like that for a year because he thought that worked just fine for him. That was it. He just wanted to see the starting screen. We thought it was going to be a joke and that he would be annoyed with us and that it would be a hilarious prank, but it actually made him happy. Sometimes things are strange in our industry. Sometimes things are strange. So don't be afraid to ask early on, what's the goal? What processes that you're expecting to happen? Write them down. Ask each step along the way, did I get this right? Be able to share that information with your team. Be able to explore when you say the old system could do this, what is your expectation? And be able to confidently say, I think that's a great idea, but it's out of scope. So do you want to change the schedule or the plan so that we do that instead? Or would you like to do that a little later? It shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be hard. And all of these things are part of billables. So if you're working in an organization that you go, I can't do this, I can't spend the time on this, you will spend the time on this. It's just whether or not you spend the time up front to make the customer happy, or if you will spend the time later to fix a customer that's upset. That's it. I think that's going to be the quote of the podcast there. Okay. Well, that's enough babble time. Let's talk a little bit about some system pieces here around Business Central. A lot of people tune in for the BC stuff, and let's talk today about what we can do to work more efficiently with the system. So, there, I think, and I'm going to start needing to keep Dungeon Master style notes about in our previous sessions we talked about. I'm going to have to start doing that because I don't, oddly enough. We're only a half dozen episodes in, so mostly I knew. We've talked a little bit about some of the template parts of the system, but there are a handful of different areas of the system where you can create standard transactions that you want to be able to access on a regular basis and be able to reuse them quickly and easily. And I'm often surprised by the number of people who don't know about them. Some of them are very in your face and obvious, some of them are not. So, if we were to spend some time in the Gen Journal as a business manager type person, and we are creating different journals for entering information on a regular basis. Now, first of all, most people, I'm not going to say everyone, most people are aware of the fact that Gen Journals are just, a bunch of journal lines, and you can post them, and that's cool. That's pretty standard stuff. A lot of folks are aware that there are what are called recurring journals. But I find it interesting that a fair number of people have not even seen the recurring journals in the system. I find that a little surprising sometimes, but I've flipped through some of the different role centers, and they're not really exposed in the UI very much. So what is a recurring journal compared to a regular Gen journal? Well, a recurring there are recurring journals for lots of the other different areas of the system, but I admit I don't see very many people using sales or purchase journals. So anyways, recurring general journals have the same general functionality as the general journal, except they've got 2 extra little columns. They've got a recurring method and a recurring frequency, and these are cool stuff. I find it surprising the number of folks who don't use these. So the first option here, recurring method, I'm not going to go into all of the different details, but they're so much fun. The 2 that give people the most benefit right away are in the list of options. We've got fixed, variable, and balance. Then we have reversing fixed, reversing variable, reversing balance. We also have balance by dimension and reversing balance by dimension. As you can imagine, there's a lot of power and logic hiding behind that long list of options, but the immediate get benefit right away that I can speak to is fixed and variable. Fixed recurring method will keep all of the different fields that you set up for this Gen Journal batch and keep the amounts. So for example, if your organization pays monthly rent and insurance on that property and a variety of different things, you could set up all of those different expense recordings. If you're just going to enter them as Gen Journal transactions, you could set up all of those different recorded expenses to your expense account, balance it against your bank account if you want. If you set them up as fixed, those amounts keep, and when you hit post, the lines are not deleted like a regular old Gen Journal. They stay put. The difference is the posting date updates based on the recurring frequency field. Variable works the exact same way, except the amount changes. So for example, if you have regular monthly expenses that are a little more variable in nature, like maybe it's payroll that varies based on hourly usage, or maybe you have utilities like electricity and various things that fluctuate, you set them to variable, set up all the different lines, because after all, it is a Gen Journal, so you can put them against the GL account for your expenses of rent or utilities or whatever have you. And you can balance those against your bank account, set your recurring frequency, which can be things like 1 month. Recurring frequency is a date formula, so it takes a variety of different structures. There's a couple of good blog posts about date formulas, so you'll want to look that up if you haven't used it. It's the same logic that is used for payment terms, where basically it takes a given date and then it adds whatever you want. So you could do, CM for close of month, and then when you post it, it will be the end of the next month, or end of, I think in the recurring system it'll be the next month, but The general idea here is that this is a set of gen journal lines you're going to create over and over again on a recurring frequency, and you know what that recurring frequency is. And you just want to be able to make sure the posting dates are right, and maybe you might want to make sure the amounts are right, hit post, and move on with your day. That's it. It's a brilliant little system. I remain surprised at how many customers aren't aware of it. Many customers don't know. And then you have a separate option that is a little tiny bit more obvious in the gen journals themselves. And this overlaps a little with recurring functionality. If you set up a whole batch of gen journal transactions that are, they're not necessarily things that you say, I know I'm going to need to post this every 2 weeks, or I'm going to post this every month, but there's something that you're going to do on a regular basis. Say, for example, your organization does conferences or events, or your people do travel on a regular basis, and you want to record all of those different expenses in gen journal lines. Maybe there's 10 or 12 of those that you need to create with all the balancing entries, blah blah blah. But you don't know that you're going to need those every month. Well, once you've set up all of those different lines with your GL accounts, your account numbers, descriptions, balancing, all those different pieces, there's a wonderful little option in the let me double check here. Yep. In the action bar, in the actions functions, you can save as standard journal. And I almost wish this was a slightly different name, because it's effectively a journal template. I think that would be a bit slightly better language, but it's sticking around as just probably it's been this way for a long time. There's no benefit to changing the name. So a standard journal is just a mechanism by which you can say, I want to save all of these lines to a template. And then in the same sequence of things, promoted, under the action bar process, there is an option to get standard journals. And you can select from your list of quote-unquote standard gen journals, and when you select from that list and say OK, it generates all of those lines in your gen journal. So it's a really nice, easy template system for things that you don't want to have to key in every single time, every little piece of that transaction, but it's not regular enough for a recurring transaction. That's really easy. Both of those things can save enormous amounts of time if you're doing like financial consolidations or any variety of different transactions. They can get to be 20, 30, hundreds of lines. Some people recording payroll expenses, it's going to be a monster of a thing, especially if you're doing dimensional reallocation based on departments. Woo. So that's one area of the system where you can have a huge amount of benefit to making use of what's there, just to be able to use templates out. The other area that I find people don't use as often as they should, and we'll start on the purchasing side with this, is there are let's see, I believe, I'm just doing a quick search of my tell me what you want to do, whatever search that is. There is a whole system in here called recurring purchase lines and recurring sales lines. This is the same concept in that you can create a template of lines. If I hit new, I will get a card, I get a code, I get a description, a currency code, and then I get a whole bunch of lines. And you look at this and you go, I don't see what the benefit here is here. Well, let's say, for example, you're doing a mailing of some sort, and you know that every time your organization sends out a catalog or whatever have you, that you are going to send out a GL account There's going to be an expense of 100 postage or whatever have you, and you can set up a GL account for your advertising account, whatever. We're not going to go through and fill out everything on this, but this allows you to pre-create a whole bunch of standard transactions that you might want to use on a purchase order. Well, if we go to our purchase invoice, for example, and create a new purchase invoice, we pick whatever vendor makes sense for us. So we'll go with our publisher here. And what we can do, and let me see if I can make sure to find it here. Yep. Under the action bar, under more options, we've got actions, functions, and we can get recurring purchase lines. Recurring purchase lines, once again, it's not named template, but that's the idea. However, if you do that, you will see that this recurring purchase lines window that pops up is specific to the vendor that we're working with. So it's empty on this particular list. So even though we just set up a mailing standard template, that is not configured for this vendor. So where do you do that? Well, if we go to our vendor, we go to our publisher, and we look at, let me make sure I'm going the right place. Yep. In the action bar, in related purchases, there is a recurring purchase lines. And here we are able to, for this vendor, define what are some of the standard purchases, the recurring purchase document type things that we just defined. We can say we want this for this vendor. And what's neat about this too is that on this screen for the vendor specific recurring purchase lines, you also get the option to choose on, say for example, invoices, if you want to insert the record lines manually, which is the default, or automatically, or ask. You can do that for quotes, orders, invoices, memos. All of this is the same over in the customer side. You can do this for standard orders in the sales side for customers. I utilize this functionality internally. For example, there are a variety of different organizations and services that we have monthly expenses for those particular vendors, and there's just one thing that we pay them for. For example, I'm streaming right now to you via Restream. Well, that's a small monthly fee. I like to have it as proper purchase invoices in my system, so I set up a recurring purchase line for Restream with which GL account to charge that to, and I have that for my Restream vendor set up as a recurring purchase line, and it inserts automatically on any new invoice I create for this vendor. So now if I go to an invoice and create the invoice for that vendor, I automatically get the GL account, 8240 postage, and I've got my quantity number. Now you'll notice that it did not give us the option, if you're seeing this visually, it did not give us the option to define the amount. So that is something that you don't get to default. I'm not sure why we're allowed to default the quantity and not the amount. Okay. I haven't been asked, oddly enough, by any customers to change that yet, but it seems like that would be an easy wish, want, ask, etc. But then you potentially get multiple different lines. That can be all sorts of different stuff. That can be standard items, that can be standard GL accounts, it can be all different things. This is fantastic for your salespeople if you have customers that frequently order the same stuff over and over again, but they maybe vary the quantity a little bit. Well, why make them rekey in those item numbers every single time? You can just go ahead and create a sales order. Yes, I'm sure I want to exit. If you create a sales order for a customer and this is going to be something that they're going to order like this on a regular basis, you can, and I believe there is, I'm just checking on my side if we can actually save this as recurring lines. I don't think there's an option to do that. Nope. or if it is, it's buried beyond my ability to find quickly on stream. You can create some standard lines for being able. Just checking here. Yeah, so nothing special. Anyways, you can create a standard order for customers and then just march through, set the different quantities. That's fine. Massive time improvement for people who are using the system. So make use of standard journals, make use of the recurring journals that make sense, make use of standard purchase lines and the standard sales lines. Yeah, recurring sales lines, recurring purchase lines. They are so helpful. A lot of people don't know they're there, and they're fantastic. It is so common to have an invoice that you're punching in month after month, or scanning in and typing in all the info, whatever have you. Just do this. This saves you a lot of time. Okay. Well, that takes care of some of the things I wanted to talk about and some of the efficiencies. There's always more ways to use a system better, so hopefully we'll explore some of those in future episodes. That said, let's head over to our Visual Studio Code environment, because the same is absolutely true for programmers who are working with the system. Thanks, Visual Studio Code. I'm not updating Visual Studio Code live on stream. There are always faster ways to do things. And one of the biggest challenges for developers is finding the time to incorporate those into I apologize. One of the challenges is finding the time to incorporate those into your habits in your workflow. Especially if you're the sort of person who, like me, will, in the extensions in Visual Studio Code, I will absolutely make use of standard packs. Waldo has a pack for extensions. I've got a pack for extensions, the Spare Brain pack, that installs a million little helpers. And each and every one of these extensions in Visual Studio Code adds extra functionality. If we look at the AL toolbox from Bart, for example, we can see in the feature contributions list, it adds a lot of things. It adds a lot of commands. We can open related tables. We can do some change renumbering objects. We have great functionality around regions, all that sort of stuff. And all of these things come with settings, lots and lots of settings. One of my favorites, for example, in the BC space is Waldo's extension. So we can see here Waldo's got lots and lots and lots of settings, and I use this every single project, this extension, because of some of the things that it gives me. If you haven't seen it yet, there is a fantastic series. Pardon any of the folks watching on channel here. I'm going to just go look up the series. There is a fantastic series on the Europa webinar channel that they did. There we go, videos that they did last year with Visual Studio Code extensions. Oh wow, we're coming up on a year since those were done. This was a 4-part series. I eventually did a 5th part, but this was a 4-part series talking about what the extensions are, what the goals were, how to make use of them in an efficient way. So if you're wondering, like, for example, how do I make use of some of these different extensions? Well, the beautiful thing is that each of these different extensions, like that AL DevTools, what does it do? Well, you've got a nice, easy jump to, I can watch for 20 minutes, just squeeze it into my world, jump right to the AL DevTools section, and see that 20 minutes of the author explaining what can I do with this extension. So the advantages to that are some of the different efficiencies that you can gain. So in our example extension that we've been building for just demonstrating some table basics, some page basics, we've got a variety of objects just kind of cluttering up our root folder here. And they should, first of all, go off into a source folder. There's some naming best practices. Don't ask me again. So I'm just going to move all of my objects into the source folder. One of the best practices that you should be doing is anytime you are creating new objects, they should have some what is called an affix, a prefix, or a suffix that should be at the beginning or end of the name that guarantees uniqueness. This is utilized heavily in AppSource. You actually can register by asking Microsoft for it, a specific prefix or suffix that belongs to your organization to guarantee that your organization objects never have a name collision with anyone else's objects. I find that many people who are developing per-tenant extensions, for example, will either prefix their object names with PTE to make sure it's per-tenant extension, or potentially even just use the customer name. So if this was, Cronus Corporation, they might do CC sample text or something like that. Just the reason for this is if Microsoft ever added an object named sample text to your system and they roll out that update and you've got sample text installed, well, guess what? You're in a bad world of hurt because you can't rename tables in the cloud environment. You're going to have a real rough time. So it is common practice to always make sure to name your objects with a prefix or a suffix. And the same is also true for when you're doing extensions to tables. Here, for example, we're extending customer with some new field. First of all, this object name is just customer, which is allowed because this table extension type customer is not going to collide with a table type customer. But we absolutely should have it be called like PTE customer. And when you're creating new fields on existing tables, the same rules apply. If Microsoft ever added a field called some new field, we'd be in trouble because you can't rename fields. So it is a very, very good idea when you're doing table extensions to include your prefix and affix to those. Obviously, typing those all the time is going to take a fair bit of effort. To that end, there is settings in the CRS AL extension that Waldo made that helps you manage this process. And it also helps you follow the standard naming practice. You'll notice that in my source folder, this table extension for customer is named customer.tablext.al. That is a standard naming convention utilized by a variety of different rules, and it's considered a best practice in the AL world to have object name.type.al. So how do we adhere to some of these good practices? Well, one of the things that I like to do with CRS, if we hit F1 to open up the action browser here, we can hit this little option for CRS called Configure Best Practice File Naming. I do this every time to every project, and I put this, if I'm working with multiple extensions, that's a whole nother topic, but we're working with just a single extension, so we're going to save these settings. Where would you like to configure the best practice naming configuration? We're going to save that into this workspace. That creates a settings.json folder file. Here we have file name pattern, pattern extension, pattern page customizations, all that fun stuff. cool. Well, we can also, in the CRS settings here, which I like to work with it just in the JSON, we can see that there is an option in here on save AL file action. Default is to do nothing, but we can also say rename. I love this option. There is a reorg, but there are some pros and cons to that. And if we come into CRS and we give an object prefix to this of PTE, including a space, and we save this now, we've now configured this Visual Studio Code extension to have a naming pattern. We want to rename the files, and we want to add PTE. So this is pretty cool. If we come to our customer table extension and just resave this, the extension is going to do two things automatically for us. It will add the PTE to the object name, and it also detected that we have custom fields that we're adding to a standard table, so it adds PTE to all the field names. And also, it renamed the file to match that. So, yeah, pretty cool stuff. That is probably going to need to be where we're going to wrap things up for today. I'm looking at the time. We've already gone an hour, babbled a fair bit about requirements and setting things. So, we will dive into, I'll spend a little bit more time over in Visual Studio Code next episode. But yeah, okay. I strongly encourage people to go watch those Europa videos, the webinars from last year. Each of the extension authors explains lots about how to get the best out of each of their extensions. What do you gain for efficiencies in them? Strongly encourage that. All right, well, that pretty much wraps things up for today. I hope this provided some good food for thought around exploring what's scope, how do you manage that, how those different expectations work, and I am looking greatly forward to, I'm doing the rare thing. I actually know what I want to talk about next week as well. So I hope folks are sticking around. This is available on YouTube. You can subscribe and get notified when there's new versions of this out. It is also an audio podcast if people want to just listen to the first half and just hear the jibber jabber section of things. You'll find it on all sorts of podcasting platforms, including Spotify, and anything in the Apple ecosystem. So with that, I hope you guys all have gotten some good ideas, food for thought, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.